Welcome to our Booktube for Yoube. Alright, I'm Ozborne Stelter.
And I'm Forrest Amy. And today we're going to be talking about Symptoms of Being Human by Jeff Garvin and the themes it portrays in relation to
Two other books, Mexican White Boy
by Matt De La Peña
and The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian
by Sherman Alexie. So the major theme we found in Symptoms of Being Human was acceptance, but before we talk about that, we're gonna want to go into our opinions about. So personally, I like the book. I like how it connected a lot of themes. It gave me a lot of information I didn't know about dysphoria and transgender and gender fluid. However, I thought at times the main character, Riley, was a little overdramatic. What about you? What did you think?
I like what you were saying. I completely agree with you. As one of those cisgendered white kids, I couldn't really tell you too much about any of these subjects that the book really discussed and went very in depth on. So it really plays against what I've seen throughout my life in a good way, because it opens my eyes and it allows me to look back and see how I've handled my own situations with my own past experiences. So it really brings me into the role of how I've been accepting in my life.
So inside the theme of acceptance, there's a lot of sub-themes that we found throughout these books, and the first of which is self-acceptance.
Self-acceptance is really seen throughout Symptoms of Being Human. Just by, what Riley actually does as an individual to kind of come to terms with who Riley is. So throughout the book, Riley is seeing a therapist, actually, and the therapist is actually the one who encourages Riley to start the blog under the profile of Alex, and come to terms with who Riley is as an individual through this persona of Alex. But even so, Riley is beginning to explore and figure out who they are as a person, rather than just go throughout life and kind of be judged by others.
And in Mexican White Boy, the main character Danny is actually dealing with a similar thing, as he is half Mexican, half white, and he does not speak Spanish. So he's dealing with a lot of identity issues because he doesn't speak Spanish in a group in Mexico that does speak Spanish. So he's isolated.
Yeah, and in the True Diary of a part-time Indian, you get to see how Junior is kind of coming to terms with who he is as an individual and his potential where he is in the Indian reservation, opposed to how he would do in his life outside of the reservation. So you see him accept his fate for what it is if he stays, and how it would enhance his education and his whole life as general if he does actually take the steps and leave to go to a different white school. All right, so the second sub-theme of the book that we saw was the theme of bullying. Now, in the part-time Indian book, we saw that Junior was going through kind of a hard time just coming to terms with who he was as an individual by himself. But this is much harder to do when you have to go throughout your life and you have to be judged by others, which we see in all kinds of books that we're reading these days. So as Junior goes to school, he has to face a whole different set of people, all these white people all around him judging him for being an Indian from the reservation, and he has to kind of come to terms with how society works in this new setting. So this really brings us into the other book, Symptoms of Being a Human, with how Riley has to kind of adjust to this new school setting as well.
Yeah, so Riley runs into a lot of instances where people are staring, you can tell that they're judging her, and that comes into play a lot throughout the book. And Riley oftentimes is afraid to engage it with people, and a lot of people end up bullying here, such as the football player and his girlfriend, who's also very popular in the school. And so Riley has to deal with a lot of bullying through that.
Yeah, and it doesn't stop there either. It goes on to the online blog profile, Alex, and Riley ends up seeing a lot of kind of weird bullying that may or may not actually be coming from the students in the school that Riley is actually with, and it's just a lot of added stress that Riley has to come to terms with and deal with throughout the book.
And bullying even comes into play in Mexican White Boy with Danny because he doesn't speak Spanish. So a lot of people that he's around end up making fun of him for that when it's not his control. So the third sub-theme we're going to be talking about is friendship. And in Mexican White Boy, Danny, to a lesser extent, is friends with his cousin and is kind of learning how to interact with her. But the major friendship he has is with Uno, which is a character he starts off rough with, but they slowly become better friends and he begins trusting him a lot more.
Yeah, and you can see friendship develop throughout the entire kind of book of the part-time Indian, because you can see Junior, as he gets to a new school, he struggles to make friends, and then when he does make friends with people like Gordy, it's kind of a give and take relationship that has to develop over time. And of course, with how he kind of has to deal with his best friend throughout the book, Rowdy, in the reservation, and how he kind of betrays him but tries to build back up that friendship. You can see the development over time throughout the entire book.
And in Symptoms of Being Human, Riley is obviously at a new school and is making friends, and one of which is Solo, which their relationship fluctuates, but ends in trust and caring as friends. And Beck, who also leaves for a period, but also comes back. And both friends end up showing Riley that they're worthy of trust.
Yeah, by going really deeply into the overall theme of acceptance and being there at the very end after the whole rapey incident, of course. And they show continuous support by going to the meetings and actually show up at the end when Riley does come out and say that Riley is Alex, the blogger. All right, so this actually brings us to our fourth and final sub-theme for the book, which would actually be parental acceptance. So throughout all three novels, not just Symptoms of Being Human, we see that parental figures are a very important element of the book. So in Symptoms of Being Human, we see that Riley is actually struggling with getting Riley's parents to actually be involved in understanding of Riley's circumstances. And we actually end up seeing this as a deeper scale in the book, because Riley has to deal with the fact that Riley's father is actually a political figure. And Riley's father actually wants to have that standard American stereotypical perfect family, or at least the image of that, so he can actually get reelected. But this is very taxing on Riley as an individual, because Riley has to not only deal with just parental acceptance, but also, acceptance from a much broader scale.
Mm-hmm. And in Mexican White Boy, Danny, his father left when he was very young, so he's been out of the picture, and one of the points of the book is that he's trying to find his father, and because he was gone, he missed out on a lot of fatherly advice or even learning Spanish in the case of Mexican White Boy. So there's a lot of problems going on with that.
Yeah, and this can also be seen in the True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, with how Junior had to deal with not only his own parents, his father being an alcoholic, but also dealing with parental type figures and their absence from life. With how Eugene, which is basically like an uncle-father figure to Junior, and how he has to reconcile with the fact that Eugene was shot and killed. And then he also has to deal with his sister and what happens to her, his grandmother, and actually from the very beginning of the book with his dog, who he looks up to. So this acceptance of, kind of superior parental figures is a very overarching theme throughout all three books.
So to recap, the biggest theme we found throughout all three books is acceptance, and I think that's a major theme in almost all young adult literature books. But it's pretty prevalent in these. And to wrap up, like my opinions on Mexican White Boy, I thought it was a really good book. I liked it. There's definitely some violence in it, and if you've ever read Touching Spirit Bear, it's kind of along those lines. But I kind of related to some of the characters' issues, just not myself, but I have friends that are also Mexican, but they don't speak Spanish, and they deal with that a lot. And
Yeah, I actually really enjoyed the Part-Time Indian book, just because of how it shows like the culture shock of switching schools and having to deal with a whole new set of kind of rules and social norms. So I think it was very interesting, just because I did move around a bit as a kid, and actually moving down to Florida for college from Massachusetts was a big culture shock. So I thought it was a very accurate portrayal, even though it's not a very big distance thing in the novel. But yeah, no, I really liked it. And as far as it kind of relates to symptoms of being human, I just feel like it has a lot of those, sub-themes, of course, that we related to already, but it kind of draws in that big overall, like, all the struggles that normal, wear and move kind of has on people. So I think it was a very good perspective novels on both ends of the True Diary and Symptoms of Being Human.
And also in Symptoms of Being Human, it was really informative for me, because as a cis straight male, I don't really know much about that, and it was kind of interesting to learn all about it. And we actually both ran into the difficulties of trying to not put a label or a gender on the character Riley, because that's kind of the whole point that the author was going for in the book, is to never explicitly give the gender of Riley, the main character.
Yeah, so this has been our BookTube for you.